Isabella Martinez sat in the corner of her father's enormous study, watching the dust particles dance in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the massive windows. The 17-year-old girl had been silent for as long as anyone could remember, not because she couldn't speak, but because she chose not to. Her father, Ricardo Martinez, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had tried everything money could buy to help his daughter find her voice again. The Martinez mansion sprawled across 50 acres of pristine land just outside the city, complete with manicured gardens, a private lake, and staff quarters that housed nearly 30 employees. Ricardo had built this empire from nothing, starting with a small construction company and growing it into a multinational corporation worth billions. But all his success meant nothing when he looked at his daughter's sad, empty eyes. Isabella's silence had begun 5 years ago, shortly after her mother's sudden death in a car accident. Maria Martinez had been the light of both their lives, a warm and loving woman who filled their home with laughter and music. When she died, it was as if Isabella's voice died with her. The doctors said there was nothing physically wrong with the girl's vocal cords or throat. It was purely psychological, they explained, a trauma response that might resolve itself with time and therapy. Ricardo had hired the best therapists, psychiatrists, and specialists from around the world. They came and went like seasons, each promising breakthrough treatments and revolutionary approaches. Isabella sat through countless sessions, staring out windows or drawing in her sketchbook, never uttering a single word. Her father's desperation grew with each failed attempt, and his guilt weighed heavier on his shoulders with each passing day. The household staff had learned to communicate with Isabella through gestures and written notes. She was intelligent and kind, always polite in her silent way, but there was an unmistakable sadness that surrounded her like a heavy cloud. The other staff members, mostly longtime employees who had known Isabella since she was a baby, treated her with gentle care and respect. Among the staff was Amara, a woman in her 60s who had joined the household 6 months ago as head housekeeper. Unlike the others, Amara was from a small village in Haiti and had come to work for the Martinez family through a domestic agency. She was tall and dignified, with silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a neat bun and deep brown eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. From the moment Amara arrived, Isabella felt drawn to her in a way she couldn't explain. There was something different about this woman, something that made Isabella feel calm and safe in her presence. Amara never pushed Isabella to speak or tried to force conversation like others did. Instead, she would hum soft melodies while cleaning, songs that Isabella had never heard before but somehow found comforting. Amara had her own small room in the staff quarters, but Isabella often found excuses to be wherever Amara was working. She would sit quietly and watch as the older woman dusted furniture or arranged flowers, occasionally receiving a gentle smile or a knowing nod. Amara seemed to understand Isabella's pain without needing words to explain it. The other staff members whispered about Amara sometimes, saying she was mysterious and kept to herself too much. They noticed she had unusual belongings in her room, strange bottles filled with dried herbs, old books written in a language none of them recognized, and small cloth pouches that smelled of unfamiliar spices. Some said she practiced voodoo or other mystical arts, but these were just rumors spread by people who didn't understand her culture. Ricardo was usually too busy with his business empire to pay much attention to the household staff, as long as they did their jobs efficiently. His days were filled with board meetings, international phone calls, and deal negotiations that could affect thousands of employees worldwide. But he noticed that Isabella seemed more peaceful lately, less restless than she had been in years. When he asked his assistant about any changes in the household, she mentioned that Isabella had been spending time with the new housekeeper. This information concerned Ricardo slightly. He was naturally protective of his daughter and suspicious of anyone who might try to take advantage of their family's wealth or Isabella's vulnerable state. He made a mental note to observe this Amara more closely, though he was also hopeful that maybe she was having a positive influence on his daughter. Isabella's days followed a predictable routine. She would wake up late, eat breakfast alone in her room, spend time in the library or art studio, and often end up wherever Amara was working. Her homeschool tutors came and went, frustrated by her refusal to participate verbally in lessons. She completed written assignments perfectly, proving her intelligence, but her silence made traditional teaching methods nearly impossible. One afternoon, Isabella was sitting in the garden while Amara tended to her mother's rose bushes. These roses had been Maria's pride and joy, and Ricardo had insisted they be maintained exactly as she had left them. Most of the staff found the task emotionally difficult, but Amara approached it with reverence and care, as if she understood the sacred nature of this small memorial. As Amara worked, she began to hum again, but this time the melody was different. It was sadder, more haunting, and it seemed to reach deep into Isabella's heart. The girl felt tears welling up in her eyes, something that rarely happened anymore. She had become expert at keeping her emotions locked away, just like her voice. Amara noticed Isabella's tears and sat down beside her on the stone bench. Without saying anything, she pulled a small handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped the girl's cheeks. Her touch was warm and comforting, like a grandmother's might be. For the first time in years, Isabella leaned into someone's embrace, allowing herself to feel the comfort of human connection. That evening, Ricardo returned home to find Isabella in the dining room for dinner, something she rarely did anymore. She usually ate in her room or grabbed something quick from the kitchen. But tonight, she sat quietly at the long mahogany table, picking at her food while Amaris served the meal. Ricardo studied the interaction between his daughter and the housekeeper, noticing how naturally they communicated without words. After dinner, Ricardo approached Amara in the kitchen where she was cleaning up. He thanked her for her good work and mentioned that Isabella seemed more settled lately. Amara simply nodded and said in her lilting accent that Isabella was a special girl with a wounded heart that needed time to heal. Her words were simple but profound, and Ricardo felt a strange sense of hope that he hadn't experienced in years. As weeks passed, the bond between Isabella and Amara grew stronger. The older woman would tell Isabella stories about her homeland while they worked together in the garden or sat in the library. She spoke of mystical traditions, healing practices passed down through generations, and the power of belief in overcoming life's greatest challenges. Isabella listened intently to every word, though she never responded verbally. Amara also shared stories about her own family, including a daughter who had died young and a granddaughter she had left behind in Haiti to come work in America. These personal revelations created a deeper connection between the two women, both of whom had experienced profound loss. Isabella began to understand that she wasn't alone in her pain, that others had survived similar tragedies and found ways to continue living. The other household staff began to notice changes in Isabella's behavior. She smiled more often, participated in activities around the house, and seemed generally more alert and present. Her art teacher reported that her drawings had become more colorful and expressive. Her tutors found her more engaged in written work, though she still refused to speak during lessons. Ricardo was pleased with these developments, but remained cautious. He had seen his daughter make small improvements before, only to retreat back into her shell when something triggered painful memories. He didn't want to get his hopes up too high, but he couldn't deny that Amara's presence seemed to be having a positive effect on Isabella. One evening, Ricardo was working late in his study when he heard soft music coming from the garden. Looking out his window, he saw Isabella and Amara sitting together on a blanket under the stars. Amara was playing a small wooden flute, creating haunting melodies that drifted through the night air. Isabella was lying on her back, looking up at the sky with an expression of peace that Ricardo hadn't seen on her face since before her mother's death. He watched this scene with mixed emotions. Part of him was grateful that someone had finally been able to reach his daughter in a way that trained professionals couldn't. But another part of him was worried about becoming too dependent on one person for Isabella's emotional well-being. What would happen if Amara decided to leave? Would Isabella retreat even further into herself? These concerns kept Ricardo awake that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his responsibilities as a father. He had given Isabella every material advantage money could buy, but he had failed to give her the emotional support she needed to heal from her trauma. His own grief over losing his wife had made it difficult for him to help his daughter process hers. The next morning, Ricardo made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of going to his office as usual, he announced that he would be working from home for the rest of the week. He wanted to spend more time observing Isabella's daily routine and understanding how Amara was helping her. This decision created a ripple of anxiety throughout the household. The staff wasn't used to having their employer around during normal working hours, and they worried about making mistakes under his watchful eye. But Ricardo tried to be unobtrusive, setting up a temporary office in the library where he could see much of the house's activity without being intrusive. What he observed over the next few days amazed him. Amara had a natural gift for understanding people's emotional needs and responding to them with exactly the right approach. She never pushed Isabella to do anything she wasn't ready for, but she created opportunities for small steps forward. Whether it was encouraging Isabella to help with cooking, teaching her traditional crafts, or simply sitting in comfortable silence together, Amara seemed to know intuitively what Isabella needed at any given moment. Ricardo also noticed that Amara treated Isabella with a perfect balance of respect and care. She didn't baby her or treat her like she was fragile, but she also didn't ignore the very real trauma that had shaped Isabella's world. This approach was something that none of the expensive therapists had managed to achieve, despite their advanced degrees and specialized training. By the end of the week, Ricardo had made another important decision. He would give Amara a raise and additional responsibilities that would allow her to spend more time with Isabella. He would also stop pushing for new therapists and treatment programs for a while, allowing this natural healing process to continue without interference. When he told Amara about his decision, she thanked him quietly but said she had something important to discuss with him. She asked if they could meet privately that evening after Isabella went to bed. Ricardo agreed, curious about what she might want to talk about. That night, they sat in the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen, away from the rest of the household. Amara explained that she had been observing Isabella carefully and believed the girl's silence was more than just psychological trauma. She spoke of spiritual wounds that conventional medicine couldn't heal, of connections between the living and the dead that modern society had forgotten how to understand. Ricardo listened politely, but skeptically. He was a practical businessman who dealt in facts and figures, not mystical concepts and spiritual healing. But as Amara continued talking, describing Isabella's behavior in terms that no therapist had ever used, he began to wonder if there might be truth in her unconventional perspective. The next morning, Ricardo woke with a heavy heart and an even heavier decision weighing on his mind. He had spent most of the night thinking about Amara's proposal, analyzing it from every possible angle like he would any important business decision. But this wasn't about profit margins or market shares. This was about his daughter's future, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Isabella came down for breakfast looking more rested than she had in months. She had been sleeping better since Amara's arrival, and Ricardo couldn't ignore this positive change. As he watched his daughter eat her cereal in peaceful silence, he realized that conventional approaches had given them nothing but disappointment and frustration. Maybe it was time to trust someone who seemed to genuinely understand Isabella's condition, even if her methods were unconventional. After breakfast, Ricardo found Amara in the laundry room, carefully folding clothes with the same attention to detail she brought to everything she did. He had made his decision during his morning coffee, and despite his natural skepticism about anything that couldn't be measured or quantified, he was ready to take this leap of faith. "I want you to try your healing approach with Isabella," he said quietly, making sure no other staff members could overhear their conversation. "But I need to understand exactly what you're planning to do. I won't agree to anything that could harm her physically or emotionally." Amara set down the shirt she was folding and looked directly into Ricardo's eyes. She explained that the healing process would involve several steps over the course of a week. First, she would need to gather specific herbs and materials, some of which she had brought from Haiti and others that could be found locally. Then, she would need to prepare Isabella mentally and spiritually for what was to come. The actual healing ritual, Amara explained, would involve a special tea made from rare herbs that had been used by her grandmother and great-grandmother to help people find their lost voices. The tea itself wasn't dangerous. It was made from natural ingredients that had been used safely for generations. But the spiritual component of the healing was more complex and couldn't be guaranteed to work. Ricardo asked about the risks involved, and Amara was honest about the uncertainties. She explained that spiritual healing sometimes brought up buried emotions and memories that could be difficult to handle. Isabella might experience vivid dreams, intense feelings, or even temporary confusion as her mind and spirit worked through the trauma that had been blocking her voice. Despite these concerns, Amara believed that Isabella was strong enough to handle the healing process, especially with proper support and guidance. She had been observing the girl for months now and felt confident that Isabella was ready for this step. The alternative was to continue living in silence, trapped between the world of the living and her connection to her deceased mother. Ricardo agreed to the plan with several conditions. Amara would explain every step of the process to him beforehand, and he would be present during the actual healing ritual. If Isabella showed any signs of distress, or if the process seemed to be causing more harm than good, they would stop immediately. And, most importantly, Isabella herself would have to agree to participate willingly. That afternoon, Amara sat with Isabella in the garden and explained what she was proposing. She spoke gently about the healing traditions of her homeland and how they might help Isabella find her voice again. She explained that it wouldn't be easy and that Isabella would need to be brave, but she believed it could help her break free from the silence that had trapped her for so long. Isabella listened carefully to every word, her eyes showing interest rather than fear. She had come to trust Amara completely over the past few months, and the idea of trying something different didn't frighten her the way it might have before. Using her sketchbook, Isabella wrote that she wanted to try the healing approach and that she was ready for whatever might happen. Over the next 3 days, Amara prepared for the healing ritual with careful attention to every detail. She gathered herbs from the mansion's extensive gardens, including lavender, sage, and chamomile that grew wild near the lake. From her personal collection, she brought out small bottles and pouches containing more exotic ingredients, roots, and leaves that had been carefully dried and preserved according to traditional methods. The other household staff watched these preparations with curiosity and some concern. They whispered among themselves about what Amara might be planning, with some expressing worry about involving Isabella in anything that seemed so mysterious and foreign. But Ricardo had made it clear that Amara had his full support, and the staff respected his authority even if they didn't understand his decision. During these preparation days, Amara also worked to prepare Isabella mentally for what was to come. She told her stories about other young people who had lost their voices due to trauma and had found them again through spiritual healing. She explained that the healing process might bring up difficult memories about Isabella's mother, but that facing these memories was necessary for true healing to occur. Isabella seemed remarkably calm about the upcoming ritual. She spent her time reading books about different healing traditions and writing detailed questions in her sketchbook for Amara to answer. Her curiosity and openness impressed both Amara and Ricardo, who had expected her to be more nervous about trying something so different from conventional therapy. On the evening before the healing ritual, Ricardo found himself more anxious than Isabella appeared to be. He had built his entire life around logic, planning, and controlling outcomes through careful analysis and strategic decision-making. Trusting his daughter's future to something he couldn't understand or control went against every instinct he had developed as a successful businessman. But as he watched Isabella and Amara sitting together in the library, reviewing the healing process one final time, he realized that his approach had failed his daughter completely. All his money, influence, and access to the best medical professionals in the world hadn't been able to help her heal from her trauma. Maybe it was time to trust someone who approached healing from a completely different perspective. That night, Isabella slept peacefully while Ricardo lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about his late wife Maria and wondered what she would think about this unconventional approach to helping their daughter. Maria had always been more open to alternative healing methods and spiritual practices, while Ricardo had been the skeptical one who insisted on scientific proof for everything. Amara had prepared everything the night before, and the special healing tea was ready to be brewed when the time was right. She had also prepared a comfortable space in the conservatory, where Isabella would be surrounded by plants and natural light during the healing process. The room had been filled with soft cushions, warm blankets, and some of Isabella's favorite personal items to help her feel safe and comfortable. Ricardo arrived in the conservatory looking nervous but determined to support his daughter through whatever was about to happen. He had taken the day off from work, something he rarely did, and had instructed his assistant to handle all calls and emergencies without disturbing him. This day belonged entirely to Isabella and her healing. Amara began the ritual by lighting several candles and burning some sage to cleanse the space of negative energy. She explained each step to Isabella and Ricardo as she performed it, demystifying the process while still honoring its spiritual significance. The aromatic smoke filled the room with a peaceful, sacred atmosphere that helped everyone relax. Next, Amara prepared the healing tea using a special ceramic pot that had belonged to her grandmother. She added the various herbs in a specific order, explaining the purpose of each ingredient as she worked. Some were for calming the mind, others for opening the heart, and still others for strengthening the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. As the tea steeped, Amara spoke to Isabella about the importance of setting clear intentions for the healing. She asked Isabella to think carefully about what she wanted to achieve through this process, and to visualize herself speaking freely and confidently. Isabella closed her eyes and focused on memories of talking and laughing with her mother, imagining what it would feel like to use her voice again. The tea, when it was ready, had a golden color and a pleasant, earthy smell that reminded Isabella of walking through forests with her mother when she was younger. Amara explained that Isabella should drink it slowly and mindfully, paying attention to how it made her feel and remaining open to whatever experiences might come. Isabella took her first sip and found that the tea tasted better than she had expected, warm, slightly sweet, and comforting like a mother's embrace. As she continued drinking, she felt a gentle tingling sensation throughout her body, as if every cell was waking up after a long sleep. The feeling wasn't unpleasant. Instead, it made her feel more alive and aware than she had in years. Ricardo watched his daughter carefully for any signs of distress, but Isabella seemed remarkably peaceful as she finished the tea. Amara had prepared him for the possibility that effects might take time to manifest, so he wasn't concerned when nothing dramatic happened immediately. Instead, he focused on being present and supportive, ready to help Isabella through whatever might come next. About 20 minutes after finishing the tea, Isabella began to feel drowsy in a pleasant, dreamy way. Amara had warned them that this might happen and had prepared a comfortable place for Isabella to rest during this phase of the healing. Isabella lay down on the soft cushions, covered by a blanket that had belonged to her mother, and allowed herself to drift into a peaceful, meditative state. What happened next was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. She found herself in a place that seemed to exist between sleeping and waking, where reality blended with memory and dream. She could hear her mother's voice calling to her from somewhere far away, and she felt an overwhelming desire to follow that voice wherever it might lead. In this dreamlike state, Isabella found herself back in her childhood bedroom, but it looked exactly as it had when her mother was still alive. The room was filled with warm sunlight, and the sound of her mother's laughter echoing from downstairs. Isabella tried to call out to her mother, but found that she still couldn't make any sound, just as in her waking life. Frustrated but determined, Isabella began searching the dream house for her mother, looking in every room and calling out silently with her heart rather than her voice. Finally, she found her mother sitting in the garden, looking exactly as she had in life, but somehow more radiant and peaceful than Isabella remembered. Her mother smiled when she saw Isabella approaching and opened her arms for an embrace. As they held each other, Isabella felt all the words she had been unable to say since her mother's death rushing through her mind. All the "I love yous" and "I miss yous" and "please don't leave me" that had been trapped inside her heart for 5 long years. In the dream, her mother spoke gently about the importance of letting go and moving forward with life. She explained that Isabella's silence had been a way of staying connected to her, but that this connection was preventing Isabella from living fully in the present. Her mother's love would always be with her, but Isabella needed to find her own voice again to honor that love properly. As this conversation continued in the spiritual realm, Isabella's physical body began to show signs of the intense emotional processing she was undergoing. Tears streamed down her face, and she made small sounds, not quite words, but the first vocalizations she had made in years. Ricardo and Amara watched anxiously, ready to intervene if necessary, but recognizing that something important was happening. The healing process continued for several hours, with Isabella drifting between the dream world and waking consciousness. Sometimes she would be completely still and peaceful, and other times she would move restlessly or make small sounds of distress. Through it all, Amara remained by her side, occasionally humming soft songs or whispering words of encouragement and support. As the afternoon wore on, Isabella's dreams became more. The days following Isabella's first spoken words were filled with wonder and careful progress. Her voice returned gradually, like a rusty instrument being slowly tuned back to perfect pitch. At first, she could only manage single words or short phrases, and speaking seemed to require tremendous effort and concentration. But with each passing hour, her voice grew stronger and more natural. Ricardo couldn't contain his amazement and gratitude. For 5 long years, he had dreamed of hearing his daughter speak again, and now that dream had become reality through the most unexpected means possible. He found himself looking at Amara with new respect and appreciation, recognizing that she had accomplished something that teams of expensive specialists had failed to achieve. The household staff was equally amazed by Isabella's transformation. Word spread quickly through the mansion that their young mistress could speak again, and everyone went out of their way to engage her in conversation. Isabella was overwhelmed by all the attention at first, still adjusting to the idea that she could participate in normal social interactions after years of communicating only through gestures and written notes. Dr. Peterson, the family physician who had been treating Isabella since her mother's death, was called to examine her and confirm that her recovery was real and stable. He arrived at the mansion with a mixture of professional curiosity and barely concealed skepticism, having seen too many false hopes and temporary improvements over the years to get excited about any reported breakthrough. But when Isabella greeted him at the door with a clear, cheerful "Good morning, Dr. Peterson," he nearly dropped his medical bag in shock. He had been expecting to find another temporary improvement that would fade within days or weeks. Instead, he found an articulate, confident young woman who seemed genuinely happy to be speaking again. During his examination, Dr. Peterson asked Isabella detailed questions about her experience with the healing ritual and her current state of mind. She described everything clearly and thoughtfully, showing no signs of the psychological fragmentation or confusion that he had expected might accompany such a dramatic change. Her speech patterns were natural and appropriate, with none of the hesitation or artificial quality that sometimes characterized recovery from selective mutism. Most remarkably, Isabella seemed to have processed much of the grief and trauma that had caused her silence in the first place. She spoke about her mother's death with sadness, but not devastation, expressing gratitude for the memories they shared rather than dwelling on the pain of their separation. This emotional maturity surprised Dr. Peterson, who had expected that recovering her voice would be just the first step in a long journey towards psychological healing. When Ricardo asked Dr. Peterson privately about the medical explanation for Isabella's recovery, the doctor was honest about his confusion. From a purely scientific standpoint, there was no reason why an herbal tea and spiritual ritual should have succeeded where years of conventional therapy had failed. But he couldn't argue with the results, and he had seen enough unexplained medical phenomena over the years to know that science didn't have all the answers. Dr. Peterson recommended continued monitoring to ensure that Isabella's recovery remained stable, but he also advised Ricardo to be grateful for whatever had happened and not to question it too deeply. Some healings, he explained, occurred through mechanisms that modern medicine didn't yet understand, and the important thing was that Isabella was healthy and happy again. Over the next week, Isabella threw herself into rediscovering the joy of verbal communication. She spent hours talking with Amara about everything and nothing, making up for years of forced silence with an endless stream of questions, observations, and stories. She called her tutors and asked to resume regular lessons, excited about the prospect of participating fully in her education for the first time in years. Most importantly, Isabella began talking about her mother freely and naturally. She shared memories that she had kept locked away during her silent years, describing family trips, inside jokes, and tender moments that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her grief. These conversations with her father helped both of them process their shared loss in a way they had never been able to do before. Ricardo found these talks both healing and heartbreaking. He learned things about his daughter's relationship with her mother that he had never known, and he realized how much of Isabella's inner life he had missed during her years of silence. But he also felt hope that they could build a new, stronger relationship based on open communication and mutual understanding. The transformation in Isabella also affected Ricardo's own approach to life and business. He had always been a driven, ambitious man who measured success in terms of profit margins and market dominance. But seeing his daughter's joy at simple conversations and everyday interactions made him reconsider what truly mattered in life. He began spending more time at home, working shorter hours, and declining some business trips that would have kept him away from Isabella for extended periods. His business associates noticed the change in his priorities, but rather than seeing it as a weakness, many of them respected him more for putting family first after years of single-minded focus on corporate success. Amara watched these family dynamics change with quiet satisfaction. She had hoped that healing Isabella would also help heal the relationship between father and daughter, and she was pleased to see them growing closer through their shared conversations and activities. But she also began to feel a familiar restlessness that told her it might soon be time to move on to help other families in need. This internal conflict troubled Amara more than she let on. She had grown genuinely fond of Isabella and Ricardo, and leaving them felt like abandoning family members. But her gift for healing came with a responsibility to share it widely rather than settling permanently with one family, no matter how much she cared for them. Isabella sensed that something was troubling Amara and, finally, asked her directly about it during one of their afternoon walks around the lake. Amara was touched by the girl's perceptiveness and decided to be honest about her dilemma. She explained that her healing work had always involved moving from family to family, helping people overcome spiritual and emotional obstacles before continuing on to the next person who needed her assistance. This revelation devastated Isabella, who had assumed that Amara would remain part of their household indefinitely. The thought of losing the person who had given her voice back felt almost as traumatic as losing her mother had been. But as they talked more about Amara's calling and her responsibility to help others, Isabella began to understand the bigger picture. That evening, Isabella had a long conversation with her father about Amara's situation. She explained that while she desperately wanted Amara to stay, she also recognized that it would be selfish to prevent her from helping other families who might be suffering the way they had suffered. Together, they wrestled with the difficult balance between gratitude and letting go. Ricardo's business instincts kicked in, and he began exploring ways to support Amara's healing work without necessarily losing her completely. He offered to fund a foundation that would allow her to travel and help families while maintaining connections with people she had helped in the past. He could provide resources, transportation, and financial support for her work while giving her the freedom to follow her calling. Amara was moved by this generous offer but explained that her work couldn't be institutionalized or organized like a business venture. The families who needed her help found her through spiritual guidance and word-of-mouth connections, not through formal referral systems. And the healing process itself required a level of personal intimacy and trust that couldn't be scaled up or systematized. As they discussed these complexities, Isabella realized that her relationship with Amara had taught her something important about love and attachment. True love, she understood now, sometimes meant supporting someone's growth and calling even when it required personal sacrifice. Her mother had loved her this way, encouraging Isabella's independence and personal development even when it meant spending less time together. This insight helped Isabella approach Amara's eventual departure with grace and maturity rather than desperation and clinging. She asked Amara to teach her some of the healing techniques she could use to help herself and others, not because she planned to become a healer like Amara, but because she wanted to honor the gift she had been given by sharing it appropriately with others. Amara spent the next several weeks teaching Isabella about herbal remedies, meditation techniques, and the importance of listening deeply to people who were suffering. She emphasized that Isabella's own experience of trauma and healing made her uniquely qualified to help other young people who might be struggling with similar challenges. These lessons gave Isabella a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. She began volunteering at local hospitals and community centers, reading to children, and spending time with teenagers who were dealing with various forms of trauma. Her natural empathy, combined with her personal experience of healing, made her remarkably effective at connecting with young people who felt hopeless or alone. Ricardo watched his daughter's volunteer work with pride and some surprise. Before her healing, Isabella had been so consumed by her own pain that she had little energy left for caring about others. But now she seemed genuinely passionate about using her experiences to help people in similar situations. This outward focus was another sign of her complete emotional recovery. The change in Isabella also affected how other people perceived the Martinez family. Ricardo had always been respected for his business acumen and wealth, but now people began to see him as someone who had successfully navigated a personal crisis with dignity and wisdom. The story of Isabella's healing, though not widely publicized, became known in certain circles and enhanced the family's reputation in unexpected ways. Meanwhile, Amara continued to prepare for her eventual departure, though she had not yet announced a specific timeline. She wanted to make sure that Isabella's recovery was completely stable and that both Isabella and Ricardo had the tools they needed to maintain their emotional health without her presence. One afternoon, while Isabella was at one of her volunteer sessions, Ricardo and Amara had a private conversation about the future. He thanked her again for everything she had done for his family and asked if there was any way he could repay her for giving him his daughter back. Amara smiled and explained that seeing Isabella happy and healthy was payment enough for her efforts. But she did have one request. She asked Ricardo to promise that he would continue to prioritize his relationship with Isabella over his business empire, and that he would never again allow work to prevent him from being present for the important moments in his daughter's life. The morning of Amara's departure arrived with unexpected serenity. Isabella woke early and found herself surprisingly calm, though she had expected to feel devastated about saying goodbye to the woman who had changed her life so dramatically. Instead, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and a strange confidence that this farewell was not really an ending, but rather a transformation of their relationship into something new. Amara had packed her few belongings into the same worn suitcase she had arrived with months earlier, though now it also contained gifts from the Martinez family and letters from various household staff members. Ricardo had insisted on providing her with a generous financial gift for her journey, though Amara had initially protested that she couldn't accept such a large sum. The goodbye scene at the front door was emotional but dignified. Each staff member had a chance to thank Amara personally and express their appreciation for the positive changes she had brought to their workplace. Many of them credited her with creating a more peaceful, harmonious atmosphere throughout the entire household, not just in Isabella's personal healing. When it was Isabella's turn to say goodbye, she surprised everyone, including herself, by speaking with clear confidence and heartfelt emotion. She thanked Amara not just for healing her voice, but for teaching her that healing was possible and showing her how to carry that knowledge forward into the rest of her life. "You didn't just give me back my voice," Isabella said, holding Amara's hands as they stood together in the morning sunlight. "You taught me that my voice has power and that I can use it to help other people find their own healing. I promise to honor everything you've taught me." Amara's eyes filled with tears as she embraced Isabella one final time. She whispered something in her native language that Isabella didn't understand, but somehow felt deeply, like a blessing or protection that would remain with her always. Then, Amara picked up her suitcase, walked to the waiting car, and drove away without looking back. In the weeks following Amara's departure, Isabella threw herself into her volunteer work with renewed energy and purpose. She began spending 3 days a week at the Children's Hospital, working specifically with young patients who were struggling with various forms of trauma-related silence or communication difficulties. Her personal experience and natural empathy made her remarkably effective at connecting with these children. Dr. Sarah Chun, the pediatric psychologist who supervised Isabella's volunteer work, was amazed by the girl's intuitive understanding of trauma and healing. Isabella seemed to know exactly what to say to frightened children, and, more importantly, she knew when to simply sit in silence and provide a comforting presence without pushing for verbal interaction. She has a gift, Dr. Chin told Ricardo during one of their regular check-ins about Isabella's volunteer activities. It's not just that she's been through similar experiences herself. She has a natural ability to create safe spaces where children feel permission to begin healing at their own pace. Ricardo felt immense pride hearing these reports about his daughter's work, but he also felt humbled by the recognition that Isabella had developed these remarkable qualities through suffering he hadn't been able to prevent or initially help her overcome. Her resilience and compassion had grown from experiences that had broken her temporarily, but ultimately made her stronger and more capable of helping others. At home, the relationship between father and daughter continued to evolve and deepen. Ricardo had kept his promise to Amara about prioritizing family time, and he and Isabella had developed new traditions around their evening conversations and weekend activities. They took long walks together around the estate, discussing everything from Isabella's volunteer work to Ricardo's business challenges and their shared memories of Maria. These conversations revealed aspects of each other's personalities that had been hidden during Isabella's years of silence. Ricardo discovered that his daughter had inherited her mother's quick wit and philosophical nature, along with a perceptive understanding of human nature that impressed him. Isabella, meanwhile, learned that beneath her father's serious business exterior was a man who genuinely cared about using his wealth and influence to make positive changes in the world. This mutual discovery led to discussions about how Isabella might eventually want to use her position as the heir to the Martinez fortune. She expressed interest in establishing foundations focused on trauma recovery and alternative healing methods, particularly for children and families who couldn't afford conventional therapy. I want to create something that honors both Mom's memory and what Amara taught us, Isabella explained during one of their evening walks. Something that helps families like we used to be, broken and hurting but still capable of healing if they can find the right kind of support. Ricardo was moved by his daughter's vision and impressed by her thoughtful approach to philanthropy. Many wealthy young people saw charity work as a social obligation or tax benefit, but Isabella clearly understood it as a genuine calling that grew from her personal experiences and values. As autumn progressed into winter, Isabella's volunteer work expanded to include group sessions where she worked with Dr. Chun to facilitate healing circles for teenagers who had experienced various forms of trauma. These sessions combined conventional therapeutic techniques with some of the alternative approaches that Amara had taught Isabella, creating a unique hybrid model that seemed particularly effective for young people. The success of these programs attracted attention from other hospitals and treatment centers, and Isabella began receiving invitations to speak at conferences about her experiences with trauma and healing. At first, she was nervous about public speaking, worried that her story was too personal or that people would be skeptical about the unconventional methods that had helped her recover. But as she began sharing her story more widely, Isabella discovered that many families were desperate for alternatives to traditional therapy approaches that hadn't worked for their children. Parents would approach her after presentations with tears in their eyes, asking for guidance about helping their own silent or traumatized children. These encounters reinforced Isabella's sense of purpose and helped her understand that her experience with Amara had been preparing her for a larger mission. She began developing a network of healers and therapists who combined conventional and alternative approaches, creating referral systems for families who needed more holistic treatment options. Meanwhile, Ricardo found his own role evolving from protective father to supportive partner in Isabella's healing work. He used his business connections and financial resources to help Isabella establish her foundation, but he was careful to let her maintain leadership and creative control over the organization's direction and methods. The Martinez Foundation for Trauma Recovery officially launched 6 months after Amara's departure, with Isabella as executive director and a board of advisors that included Dr. Chun, several other medical professionals, and a few alternative healers who had been recommended by families in their network. The foundation's mission was to provide comprehensive support for trauma recovery, combining the best of conventional therapy with carefully vetted alternative healing approaches. One of the foundation's first major initiatives was a research project studying the effectiveness of combined treatment approaches for selective mutism and other trauma-related communication disorders. Isabella insisted that any methods they endorsed be thoroughly tested for safety and efficacy, remembering Amara's warning that healing work could be dangerous if not approached responsibly. The research project attracted attention from academic institutions and medical journals, generating serious scientific interest in treatment modalities that had previously been dismissed as unproven or purely anecdotal. Isabella found herself at the center of conversations between conventional medical professionals and alternative healers, serving as a bridge between two worlds that had historically been suspicious of each other. As winter turned to spring, Isabella received an unexpected letter that would change everything once again. The return address was from a small town in Louisiana, and the handwriting was unmistakably Amara's. With trembling hands, Isabella opened the envelope and found a brief note explaining that Amara had successfully helped another family heal from trauma, but that the experience had left her feeling called to reconnect with Isabella and Ricardo. The letter included an invitation for Isabella and her father to visit Amara in Louisiana, where she was temporarily staying with relatives while deciding on her next destination. Amara wrote that she had been thinking about Isabella's foundation work and felt that there might be ways for them to collaborate without compromising Amara's need for independence and spiritual freedom. Isabella's heart raced as she read the letter, and she immediately ran to find her father to share the news. Ricardo was equally excited about the prospect of seeing Amara again, though he was also concerned about not putting pressure on her to return to their household permanently. They decided to accept Amara's invitation, planning a long weekend trip to Louisiana that would give them time to reconnect and explore possibilities for future collaboration. Isabella was particularly excited about the chance to learn more about Amara's background and the cultural traditions that had informed her healing work. The trip to Louisiana proved to be another transformative experience for the Martinez family. Amara's relatives welcomed them warmly, treating them like honored guests rather than wealthy outsiders. Amara expressed concern about commercializing or institutionalizing practices that were meant to be sacred and personal, but she also recognized the value of Isabella's foundation work in reaching families who might otherwise have no access to alternative healing approaches. Together, they began developing a model for collaboration that would respect traditional healing practices while making them more widely available. The plan involved training programs for conventional therapists who wanted to incorporate alternative methods into their practice, along with careful vetting and certification processes to ensure that sacred knowledge was being used appropriately and effectively. 3 years after Amara's first departure from the Martinez household, Isabella stood before a packed auditorium at the International Conference on Trauma Recovery, preparing to deliver the keynote speech that would establish her as a leading voice in the field of integrative healing. At 21, she had already helped hundreds of families through her foundation's programs and had published research that was changing how medical professionals approached trauma-related communication disorders. The audience included doctors, therapists, social workers, and researchers from around the world, all eager to hear about the innovative treatment approaches that had made the Martinez Foundation famous in clinical circles. But Isabella knew that her real story was much more personal and profound than the academic papers and case studies could convey. 5 years ago, she began, her voice clear and confident as it carried through the large auditorium. I was a silent, broken girl who had lost faith in the possibility of healing. Today, I stand before you not just as someone who recovered her voice, but as living proof that healing can happen in ways we never expect, through connections we never imagined possible. As Isabella told her story, she could see Amara sitting in the third row, her face beaming with quiet pride and satisfaction. Amara had flown in from New Mexico, where she had been working with a Native American community to document and preserve their traditional healing practices. The collaboration between Isabella's foundation and indigenous healers had grown into a successful model that was being replicated in communities across the country. In the audience, Isabella also spotted Dr. Chun, who had become the foundation's chief medical advisor, and several families whose children had been helped by the foundation's programs. Most meaningful to her was seeing Marcus, a 14-year-old boy who had been completely mute for 2 years following his parents' divorce, but was now speaking confidently and even serving as a peer counselor for other traumatized children. The research presentation that followed Isabella's personal story demonstrated remarkable success rates for the Foundation's integrative approach. We can no longer afford to dismiss healing modalities simply because they don't fit our conventional understanding of how recovery should work. After the presentation, Isabella was surrounded by colleagues and researchers who wanted to learn more about implementing similar programs in their own communities. She handled each conversation with grace and intelligence, demonstrating the same intuitive understanding of people's needs that had made her volunteer work so successful years earlier. Ricardo watched his daughter's professional success with immense pride, but what moved him most was seeing how genuinely happy she had become. The confident, purposeful young woman commanding respect from international experts bore little resemblance to the silent, withdrawn teenager he had worried about for so many years. The transformation had affected Ricardo as well. His business empire continued to thrive, but he now approached success differently, understanding that true wealth came from positive relationships and meaningful contributions to the world. He had restructured his company to include significant charitable giving and employee wellness programs, applying lessons about healing and community support to the corporate environment. That evening, the Martinez family hosted a private dinner at their hotel for the healers, researchers, and families who had become part of their extended community over the years. The gathering felt like a celebration not just of Isabella's professional achievements, but of the broader network of healing relationships that had grown from Amara's simple act of offering help to a traumatized family. During dinner, Amara shared updates from her recent work with indigenous communities and her ongoing efforts to document traditional healing practices before they were lost to modernization. She had established a small organization of her own, focused on preserving sacred knowledge while training selected individuals to carry these traditions forward responsibly. What Isabella has created, Amara told the assembled group, is something I could never have imagined when I first arrived at their home. She took the gift of healing she received and multiplied it exponentially, reaching families I will never meet and creating systems that will continue helping people long after we are all gone. Isabella felt tears welling up as she listened to Amara's words, remembering the frightened, silent girl she had been when they first met. The journey from that dark place to this moment of celebration and purpose still felt miraculous, even though she now understood the practical steps that had made it possible. The conversation turned to future plans and new initiatives. Isabella announced that the Foundation was launching an international program to train healing practitioners in refugee communities, working with displaced families who had experienced severe trauma but had little access to conventional mental health services. This new program would combine mobile healing units staffed by trained practitioners with community-based support networks that honored the cultural traditions of different refugee populations. The goal was to provide immediate trauma support while also strengthening communities' own capacity for ongoing healing and resilience. Amara had agreed to serve as a cultural consultant for the program, helping to ensure that traditional healing practices were integrated respectfully and effectively. Her network of indigenous and traditional healers would provide training and guidance for practitioners working with diverse populations. The conversation also touched on recent scientific developments that were beginning to explain some of the mechanisms behind alternative healing approaches. Research in neuroscience, psychology, and even quantum physics was revealing connections between consciousness, belief, and physical healing that validated many traditional practices that had previously been dismissed as superstition. Isabella was particularly excited about emerging research on the role of community and spiritual connection in trauma recovery. Studies were showing that healing happened faster and more completely when patients felt part of supportive communities that honored both their pain and their potential for recovery. As the evening wound down, Isabella found herself in a quiet corner with Amara, reflecting on how much their relationship had evolved since that first desperate attempt to help a silent, traumatized teenager. They had become colleagues and collaborators, but the bond between them remained as deep and meaningful as it had been during those early days of healing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to work for us?" Isabella asked, voicing a question that had occurred to her many times over the years. Amara smiled thoughtfully. "I believe that healing finds its way to where it's needed," she replied. "If I hadn't been the one to help you, someone or something else would have appeared when you were ready. The universe has ways of connecting wounded souls with the healing they need." This perspective had become central to Isabella's own understanding of trauma and recovery. She had learned that healing was not just about fixing individual problems, but about recognizing and strengthening the invisible connections between people that made wholeness possible. The next morning, as conference attendees prepared to return to their home communities, Isabella felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the work she was doing, but also excitement about future possibilities. The foundation was growing rapidly, and new collaboration opportunities seemed to emerge every week. More importantly, she was continuing to learn and grow personally through her work with traumatized individuals and families. Each person she helped taught her something new about resilience, courage, and the incredible capacity of human beings to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. 6 months later, Isabella received a phone call that would lead to one of the most meaningful experiences of her life. A social worker in Detroit had heard about the foundation's work and was calling about a 12-year-old girl named Sarah who had been completely silent since witnessing a violent crime in her neighborhood. Sarah's case was complicated by poverty, family instability, and a lack of community resources, but Isabella immediately felt called to help. Working with Amara and a team of local practitioners, they developed a comprehensive healing plan that addressed not just Sarah's individual trauma, but also the broader community conditions that had contributed to her suffering. The work with Sarah and her community took nearly a year, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did Sarah recover her voice and her joy in life, but the healing process had strengthened her entire neighborhood's capacity to support traumatized children and families. The success in Detroit led to invitations from other urban communities facing similar challenges, and the foundation's work began expanding into areas of social justice and community healing that Isabella had never initially considered. She realized that individual trauma was often connected to broader patterns of social inequality and community breakdown. This understanding led to the development of the Foundation's Community Healing Initiative, which worked with entire neighborhoods to address the root causes of trauma while providing individual support for affected families. The approach required collaboration with housing advocates, education reform groups, and community organizers, expanding Isabella's network far beyond the medical and healing professions. As Isabella's 22nd birthday approached, Ricardo reflected on the remarkable journey his family had taken since that day when a quiet housekeeper from Haiti had offered to help his silent daughter. The transformation had been more complete and far-reaching than he could ever have imagined, affecting not just Isabella's ability to speak, but her entire understanding of purpose and meaning in life. The birthday celebration was held at the family estate, with guests including foundation staff, collaborating healers, families who had been helped by their programs, and the household employees who had become like extended family over the years. The gathering felt like a reunion of everyone who had been touched by Isabella's healing and subsequent work. During the celebration, Isabella announced her engagement to Dr. Michael Torres, a trauma specialist who had joined the Foundation's research team 2 years earlier. Their relationship had grown from professional collaboration to deep personal connection, based on shared values and complementary skills in healing work. Michael had been initially skeptical about alternative healing approaches, but working with Isabella and Amara had opened his mind to possibilities he had never considered during his conventional medical training. Their partnership represented the kind of integration between traditional and alternative approaches that the Foundation had been promoting in all its work. The engagement announcement was met with joy and celebration. But Isabella made it clear that marriage would not slow down her commitment to the Foundation's work. She and Michael were planning to establish new programs focused on healing within families and communities, expanding the Foundation's impact even further. As the evening continued, Isabella found herself thinking about her mother and wishing Maria could see how her daughter's life had developed. She believed that her mother would be proud not just of her recovery from trauma, but of the way she had transformed her painful experiences into a source of healing for others. Standing in the garden where she and Amara had first begun their healing work together, Isabella felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost her voice to trauma but found it again through love and community support. More importantly, she had learned to use her voice not just for her own needs, but as an instrument of healing for others who were still struggling to find their way out of silence and pain. The Foundation's work would continue to grow and evolve, reaching families around the world and contributing to a growing understanding of how healing really happens. But for Isabella, the most important success was personal, the knowledge that she had taken the gift of her own healing and multiplied it into something that would benefit countless others for generations to come. As the celebration wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Amara approached Isabella with a small wrapped package. Inside was a pendant made from a stone that Amara's grandmother had worn, passed down through generations of healers in her family. "This is for you to wear when you need to remember that healing is always possible," Amara said as she fastened the necklace around Isabella's neck. "It will remind you that you carry within yourself everything needed to overcome any challenge that life might bring." Isabella touched the pendant gently, feeling its warmth against her skin and understanding that this gift represented not just Amara's blessing, but a connection to the long line of healers who had preserved and shared their knowledge across centuries and cultures. Looking around at the faces of everyone who had gathered to celebrate with her, her father, her fiancé, her colleagues, the family she had helped, and, most importantly, Amara herself, Isabella felt overwhelming gratitude for the community of love and support that had made her healing possible. She had learned that no one heals alone, and that the greatest gift anyone can receive is the chance to use their own experience of healing to help others find their way back to wholeness, hope, and the full expression of their authentic voices in the world. Ricardo watched these discussions with fascination and growing respect for the complexity of the issues involved. His business background had taught him to think in terms of scaling successful models and reaching larger markets. But Amara and Isabella were teaching him about the importance of preserving authenticity and cultural integrity even as they worked to expand access to healing resources. By the end of their visit, they had outlined a preliminary plan for ongoing collaboration that would allow Amara to maintain her independence while contributing her knowledge to Isabella's foundation work. The arrangement would involve periodic visits and training sessions, along with consultation on specific cases that might benefit from Amara's particular expertise. As they prepared to return home, Isabella felt that her life had come full circle in an unexpected way. She had lost her voice through trauma, found it again through Amara's healing, and now was preparing to use it in service of helping others heal from their own wounds. The foundation work that had started as a way to honor her experience was evolving into something larger and more significant than she had ever imagined. The flight home gave Isabella and Ricardo time to reflect on how much their lives had changed since that first day when Amara had arrived at their mansion as a simple housekeeper. Neither of them could have predicted that a quiet woman from Haiti would transform not just Isabella's ability to speak, but their entire understanding of family, healing, and purpose. As their plane descended toward home, Isabella looked out the window at the familiar landscape below and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. She had her voice back, but more than that, she had discovered how to use it meaningfully in service of something larger than herself. This promise was easy for Ricardo to make, as his priorities had already shifted dramatically since Isabella's healing. He realized that all his success meant nothing without strong family relationships, and he was determined not to repeat the mistakes that had left him emotionally distant during Isabella's years of silence. As autumn approached, Amara finally announced that she would be leaving at the end of the month. She had received what she described as a spiritual calling to help a family in another state, and she could no longer ignore this guidance. The news saddened everyone in the household, but Isabella surprised everyone by handling it with remarkable maturity and grace. Instead of begging Amara to stay or falling back into old patterns of withdrawal and silence, Isabella organized a celebration to honor Amara's time with their family and to send her off with love and gratitude. She worked with the other household staff to plan a special dinner featuring foods from Amara's homeland, and she prepared a memory book filled with photos and written reflections from everyone whose lives Amara had touched. The evening of the celebration was bittersweet but beautiful. Isabella gave a speech thanking Amara for giving her back her voice and, more importantly, for teaching her how to use that voice to help others. She promised to continue the healing work in her own way, carrying forward the lessons she had learned about love, loss, and the power of human connection. Amara responded by sharing her gratitude for being welcomed into their family and for witnessing Isabella's remarkable transformation. She reminded Isabella that the healing had come from within her own spirit, with Amara serving merely as a guide to help her access her own inner strength and resilience. As the evening ended and preparations for Amara's departure began in earnest, everyone in the Martinez household understood that they were about to close one chapter of their lives and open another. But unlike previous transitions that had been marked by loss and grief, this one felt like a natural progression toward new possibilities and continued growth. Vivid and emotionally intense, she found herself reliving the day of her mother's accident, but this time from a different perspective that allowed her to understand that the tragedy hadn't been anyone's fault. She also experienced moments of pure joy, remembering all the happy times she and her mother had shared and feeling grateful for those precious memories. Finally, as the sun began to set, Isabella's eyes fluttered open and she looked around the conservatory with clear, alert eyes. She felt different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The overwhelming sadness that had surrounded her for years was still there, but it no longer felt crushing and insurmountable. Amara helped Isabella sit up slowly, offering her water and asking gently how she was feeling. Isabella opened her mouth to respond and felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years, the desire to speak accompanied by the actual ability to make sound. Her first word was barely a whisper, but it was unmistakably clear, "Thank you." The sound of his daughter's voice brought tears to Ricardo's eyes, and he had to resist the urge to rush over and overwhelm her with questions and expressions of joy. Instead, he waited patiently as Isabella found her voice again, one careful word at a time, supported by Amara's gentle encouragement and unwavering presence. Amara explained that in her culture, they understood that some traumas created barriers not just in the mind, but in the spirit itself. She believed that Isabella's voice was trapped somewhere between this world and the next, held captive by her need to maintain a connection with her deceased mother. Until Isabella could find a way to say goodbye properly, her voice would remain locked away. This explanation resonated with Ricardo in a way that clinical diagnoses never had. He remembered how close Isabella and her mother had been, how they had shared everything and communicated almost telepathically. Maria's sudden death had given them no chance for final words or proper closure. Perhaps Amara was right about the spiritual nature of Isabella's condition. As their conversation ended, Amara made a surprising request. She asked for permission to try a traditional healing approach that had been used in her family for generations. She warned that it might not work and could potentially make things worse, but she believed it was Isabella's best chance for true healing. Ricardo found himself torn between hope and fear. Everything conventional had failed, but trusting his daughter's well-being to mystical practices felt like a massive leap of faith. As he went to bed that night, He carried the weight of a decision that could change everything for his family, one way or another.